before I forget. So in today's webinar, we're going to start out with a lightning round to get you thinking a little bit about what your digital presence looks like. Then I'm going to get into some tips and tricks for how you can think about cultivating that digital presence. We're also going to look at it on Humanities Commons specifically because our platform in particular has some ways that you can create a digital identity that are not maybe in the same ways as other websites on the internet. And then we'll look at some resources that you can also use later to continue to think about some of the topics we cover in this webinar. We'll have a little bit of time for Q&A, and then we will also look at some future plans for the Commons, and we'll see how they can align with some of the things that we're talking about today. So the first thing is our little lightning round, which is going to introduce you all to some of the things that we're going to talk about. And so I'm going to start with a couple of very quick questions. So the first one is, write one word to describe yourself. So you can write this in the chat. If you'd rather not share it, you don't have to do that. That's fine. You can write it on another piece of paper. But what is one word that you would use to describe yourself? Now, this is a really big question, and this is one that you probably are thinking, how do I describe my whole life in one word? Maybe that word is something that reflects something that you really enjoy, or maybe it just connects to your interests and what are your values. What would be one word that you would think of? I see somebody wrote curious, which was actually the word I had thought of when I was doing this activity for myself. It's funny because as the creator of the slides, I was like, can I answer this question on my own self, let alone can other people as well? But curious is what I tend to think of because I love learning. A lot of the things that I value in life are related to wanting to learn more about this world that we live in. Collaborative, that's a nice one. I am feeling very collaborative this morning because, as I mentioned, several of my colleagues from the Commons are here. So we've been collaborating on a lot of work. Excited. I'm glad I'm seeing a lot of words related to enthusiasm and excitement in the chat. Some days the one word that I would use to describe myself is like tired and exhausted, but today I'm glad people are excited, and I admit I am excited to be here too. All right, so now you've had a time to think about one word to describe yourself. Now, I have a follow-up on that, is to write one word to describe your work. That might be related to your specific occupation. It might be related to the research that you do. If you were to meet someone on the street and they were to ask you, what do you do for work, or what is your work? Or maybe even you've been in like one of those icebreaker activities where they're like, what are your research interests? What is one word that you would think could maybe describe your identity as it relates to work, or how you would think about it? I see we have somebody said interdisciplinary, which is awesome. That's one that I connect to because my work has been kind of all over the place. I've done some instructional design, I've done graphic design, a little bit of UX, social media management. My work doesn't necessarily fall into one category if I have one thing that I research. I don't think a lot of us do really have that one thing. But interdisciplinary is probably something we feel. Transdisciplinary, there we go. We're kind of adding another element to that. Supportive is another word we could maybe use for our work, especially if some of you are teachers or you work with students. You might think of your work as really related to support. On the Commons, I do a lot of user support. So support being a word that can encompass a lot of different things that we might think about. So I'm seeing some really great responses in the chat, and I'm excited to see that we have some very interesting thoughts happening there. And hopefully by the end of this webinar, maybe you'll get even more clear on what you think you could do with those words. But the reason why I wanted us to really narrow in on that one word, which is hard, right? It's a lot easier to say a lot about these things, but the one word is because when we're thinking about how we write and talk about ourselves online, we want to think about this in terms of how do we present ourselves and think about that identity as being really crucial. And the more clear you can get on how you would describe it in a concise way, the more you might be able to kind of create that digital presence that we're going to talk about today. So obviously you're in a webinar right now. I asked you a question. You probably don't know a lot of people here. Maybe you do, maybe you recognize some names and faces, but think a little bit about how your response to this question may change depending on your audience. Me asking this in a webinar is going to be different than if you talked about this with one of your friends that you maybe meet at the bar, or that you run into, maybe even on social media, that you're telling them about the work that you do. You might not necessarily say the same thing. I know that I don't, because when I talk to a lot of my friends and family about what I do for the Humanities Commons, many of them are not really familiar with the Commons. And so I don't necessarily describe my work in the same way to them that I would to any of you in this webinar who are here probably knowing a little bit about the Commons. Then also thinking about context is really important. In when you're using one word to describe yourself to a friend versus a colleague versus a stranger, how you are going to answer that is going to change based on where you are in the world. We all have been in those icebreaker situations. I know for me, I always find icebreakers kind of stressful, because I'm always like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to describe myself in like 2 sentences, let alone 1 word. But in a work meeting where you have to describe who you are and what you do is going to be very different from being in a webinar where you might not be speaking directly or having to kind of wrap in all that information together. And then also thinking about what narratives do you want to present specifically in online spaces? We all are obviously very multifaceted as human beings. And those narratives that we create, knowing that we, in the most corny way possible, contain multitudes, how do we concisely describe the things that we do? And what does that look like? And how do we present ourselves in a way that feels authentic to who we are, but still encompasses kind of that sorts of professional identity or personal identity and the different facets of us? All of these are big questions, and they're things that you may think that you have a sense of what they look like in your life, and that's awesome. And then we're also today going to delve a little bit deeper into how they relate to different technologies, and how you can think about shaping that digital presence. As maybe you have come to this workshop having no sense of these questions, and that's cool, because hopefully by the end you'll have a better idea. And maybe you already have a grasp on this and you just want to take it to the next step. So hopefully by the end of today's workshop, you'll have a few more answers on how that goes. So the next question, and you can answer this in the chat if you want, or you can just think about it, is what is your why? For why do you want to develop more of a digital presence? And in essence, why are you here today? I've listed a few of the reasons why I've heard from Humanities Commons users they want to talk about digital presence, but I'm sure I could be missing something here. So you can also add that to the chat as well if you would like. So it's very, very normal for a lot of scholars and academics to be using social media or the Commons or whatever platform to get hired. Perhaps you're a graduate student and you're nearing the end of your degree and you're starting to think about how you want to approach getting on the job market. And one way that you might be thinking about creating a digital presence is by building a portfolio of different platforms where you're thinking about things about posting about your research or talking with your colleagues in a collaborative way to show that you're engaging in thoughtful discussion around these sorts of topics. So that is definitely a very valid reason why you might be thinking about your digital presence. Another main one is probably to share your work. As a writer, a designer, a creator, you might be looking for a platform where you can shout out what you're doing and what things you're thinking about. And that's a huge one. That's a lot of what we talk about at the Commons is how do we help our users share their work and create space for what they do. Maybe you are someone that really loves being online and social media and networking in that way. It's some people are probably in this webinar thinking, oh yeah, I use social media because I have to for my job or because that's where the conversation is happening, but it's not your favorite. But maybe also some of you are like, I really enjoy the conversations I get out of it. Or maybe even if it's not you enjoy it, you think it's an important space to be able to share your thoughts on important political issues or generate information about a conversation. So maybe that's one reason why you're here. It's also completely valid to be in this webinar and say, the reason why I really want to develop a digital presence is to get my book published or to make money. publishers do sometimes look at socials to see how active is that user or what sorts of things are they talking about. Maybe some of you want to be an influencer and you're thinking, I want to know a little more about how I can think about this when I'm at the very basics. That's totally fine. Yeah, sure, you might be here because you want to share and be open about knowledge, but maybe you also are really thinking about your career and how you can get that book published and how you can point people to knowing a little bit more about you. And we'll look at some tips for how you can do that in a little bit. Maybe you're a social media researcher as well, and you are using the internet or looking at portfolios or engagement online to think about how your research goes. Also, an interesting way that you might be finding your way into social or into developing that digital presence. And then the last two things that I have on the slides that I thought of were to connect with people, which kind of ties back to having fun and meeting people. Maybe it is all about networking, which is a main reason why you might be thinking about your professional identity. And maybe you are just out there to create. As I said, like maybe as part of your way of making money is to be a creator and to put out your videos or your music and to kind of think about that. Now, we're not going to talk a lot about today about how you're going to make money on social platforms, but maybe as part of that creation, you are seeing how these things can be tied in. And I bet dollars to donuts that you're also thinking about a number of these things simultaneously, because that's how it goes when you're thinking about multifaceted presence, is how all of these things might tie into who you are. So now that you've been thinking a little bit about your why, and hopefully these first few slides have made you get it a little bit into some of the deeper things, let's think a little bit about some of the tips and tricks for how you can create a digital presence online. So we started with some big questions, and these are the same questions that you need to be thinking about when you're starting to consider how you want to create a professional identity. And the first one to go to is, what is the narrative that you want to tell? So if let's say that your goal is to get your book published, what specifically about your book or about your research is going to be compelling to the people that are going to find you on a social networking platform or on a website? If they're looking up your academic research, what specific narrative do you want them to know about you? Some of you might be in more traditional academic spaces, like tenure track positions, where you have a pretty defined track for what you need to do in order to share that narrative. Or you might know based on your department or your work, I need to be, publishing XYZ and then spreading the word about that to get myself out there. That's a narrative that's pretty straightforward. Maybe some of you are grad students and you're thinking, okay, I'm really passionate about these 5 topics and I want to be talking about them. I'm trying to find people to talk about them with. That also is a narrative that you may see yourself in. And maybe even as a tenure track professor, you could also see, well, I have this research I want to talk about, but I also want to create a larger conversation. Trying to get as specific as you can on that narrative will help you find your people online, because you'll know a little bit more about what platforms you might want to consider, where you might want to go to have those conversations, what are the things that you need to be talking about. So in the most general sense, thinking about that story that you want to tell is going to really help you shape where you want to go. Now, who is your audience? And this is also really, really crucial, just as crucial as it is to creating that narrative, which is, who are the people that you want to talk to? If it's publishers, that's a very different audience than it would be to be talking to your colleagues in your department that also are on social media. Or creating a portfolio website is going to be a very different audience that's going to look at that than students that are in your class. And of course, like, now I always come at this from kind of the rhetoric and writing perspective, because that's my background. But you have those primary audiences that are the main people that are going to be looking at what you're doing. And perhaps on social, maybe your students would be more likely to find you than on something like a portfolio website. But those spaces, there is still a lot of crossover, because someone might find you in other places online and see those things. And so creating a professional identity means being aware of who your main audience is, but also keeping in mind that there might be secondary audiences that could also help you in answering the questions that you want to have answered as part of your narrative. And then lastly, what is the context for what you want to do? So if you, let's say you have a profile on your department's website, that might be a pretty limited context, right? Because then if people are looking for you, they might find you on that website, but they might not necessarily see other projects that you're working on. And especially if you're an independent scholar, you might not have an identity that's really a professional identity, quote unquote. You might be using your social platforms in order to generate more intro around the work that you do, and maybe to create some interest in what you're writing about and reading about. So your context might be a lot broader than just trying to address your colleagues or get your research into one place. And then from there, and I've kind of mentioned this already, is what platforms fit within the narrative that you're trying to tell. Some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about is specific to social media today, but you might be in this webinar thinking, social media isn't really going to help me accomplish the goal that I want to accomplish. I really want to do more with having a space to hold all of my information in one place that I don't have to update all the time. And so we're going to look at some more tips related to this next, but thinking about those specific platforms is really important, because it may be valuable for you to join a different platform than you're on, like Mastodon or maybe Humanities Commons, but it might also not make sense to you and what you want to do. So now that we've thought about how do you get started with these things? And these are really broad questions. Let's narrow in a little bit more on where do we go to get started? Because as I mentioned, that's going to be really crucial. So the first thing that all of you should think about when you're thinking about your digital presence is, where can I best represent myself and my work? So a portfolio website or an academic profile might be the place to start if you're thinking, I just want to share my research. I don't want to be engaging in conversation. I just want to create something that my colleagues or my students can go to see the things that I've written. I am creating podcasts and I want them to go and see, what have I made? That might be the best place to start, is just by creating some sort of website or profile. Now, if you want to take it to the next step of going beyond just what specifically you want to say, where are the people that you want to connect with? And this might result in a little bit of research on your end, because this is going to really differ based on your own circumstances. Social networking sites like Twitter or Mastodon are a place to go if you want to start or join a conversation. Social networking, for better or for worse, is meant to create a conversation. And so if you're thinking, well, I really want to kind of be able to talk about the issues that I care about. One main issue that we're talking about a lot right now is AI, and the position of how AI is affecting us in everywhere. So if that's like your thing that you want to talk about, you might want to join Mastodon, because there's a lot of conversations happening on that there. You might know of another conversation from a friend or a colleague that's happening on a different platform, and that might be the place to try to have that. So if you're looking for specific to make connections, social networking is the place to go for that. Although other sites like a portfolio website might be a better place for you to just go if you want to create and share your research and information. So now that you've thought a little bit about that first step of where do you want to connect with people, and maybe you've done a little research, you've kind of lurked around some of those spaces to see where conversations are, the next thing that you probably want to think about is, where else are the people that I want to connect with? So this webinar is talking about a connected approach. And the reason why I like to think of digital presence as a connected approach is because users that are interested in your research or in joining the conversation with you are probably also on multiple platforms. I bet if we were to do a poll and I were to ask, how many social platforms are you on? And how many professional social platforms are you on, to even kind of nuance that? I bet a lot of you would say, I'm on like about 5 different sites, or maybe you just have 2 professional sites, but then you have several other social platforms that you use more or less. So if you've thought already about, okay, I want to create a portfolio website that is going to share my research. So I have that part. Now, who else can I connect with on that? And that might be where You then think about having a social platform that's specific to your professional research. Maybe LinkedIn is where you want to go to do that. Or maybe you want to, then from there, you have your website and you want to then create a YouTube channel where you make short videos on the research that you do. You want to start thinking about this as being kind of a multifaceted way of getting towards users, because the more that you're active and the more that you show that you want to get your message across, the more that will kind of create this digital identity in an organic way where you have multiple platforms that are saying the things that you want them to say. Now, we asked our users on a social poll this week what is your, which of these social networks is your favorite to spend time using? And the reason why we asked this question in this way is because even though we're talking a lot about professionalization and thinking about those professional spaces, you also as a user probably want to do something that you want to do. Maybe you might be thinking, okay, I have to use Mastodon because that's where the conversation is happening. I don't love Mastodon, but it's the place to go. That's fair. And that's totally valid to know that you need to find those spaces where the conversation is happening. But maybe you're also thinking, well, I really like Instagram. That's my favorite network to use. And so that was why we asked our users on which one they like to spend time on, because therefore, maybe you can think about how you can work the one that you spend time on into your research directly. Now, the two polls that I've screenshotted here, one was done on Twitter and one was on Mastodon. You can probably guess from looking at the results which poll took place on which platform. And you can see that we definitely still, even though Twitter has kind of, the atmosphere of Twitter has changed a lot in the last few months, we still have people that are feeling very much that Twitter is their place to hang out. We also, though, have a very strong showing for Mastodon. So I think this also reflects how the Twitter versus Mastodon battle is right now like the biggest battle in the current pop culture. Although I would also argue like the biggest loser of this poll was Facebook, because clearly a lot of people are not interested in Facebook from this poll. So if you're all like, okay, who really lost here? I think we can argue it's Facebook that lost here. So based on these results, this was what I tailored the rest of my presentation to, at least for this section, because clearly a lot of people want to know more about these two platforms and how you can use them to be able to think about your digital presence. But these tips really do also these tips are also really valid across other platforms as well. So don't just think these as being relevant to Twitter and Mastodon. So if you're not on either of those platforms, it's not going to make a huge difference. So the first step, if you are thinking, okay, I want to join Mastodon, I have no idea where to start. And let's say you've created that Mastodon profile and you're like, I have no idea how to really create a presence here. The first step is to follow others who've created a presence that you admire, that you think they do a good job of talking about the issues, and just start to follow them and watch how they talk about those things. This is going to really help you know what kinds of content that you can post and how you can get used to how that network communicates. Twitter and Mastodon are kind of similar in the way that users tend to use them. I tend to think because a lot of users went from Twitter to Mastodon, they use them in a similar way. But Mastodon allows for a little bit of a longer character limit. So users tend to write a little bit more on Mastodon, from what I've noticed, than what they used to do on Twitter. And so knowing how you can look at the way that language is used and communication is done, that can really help you understand how you can use Mastodon as a way to connect with that audience. And there is also always a chance that if you follow someone that's a friend or a colleague or even someone that you admire, they might also take a look at your profile and they might follow you back. So obviously there's a chance if they're a celebrity, maybe they won't, maybe they already have a lot of followers, but there is also still a chance that if there's someone that you connect with and that they see what you posted and they like it, that might be the way that things go. So once you've started following others and you've found people to follow, you might now feel like, okay, I want to start getting into the conversation and involve myself. So if you see that someone has posted an article that you're really, really interested in, a simple way to do that is to just reply to their post, whether it's a tweet or a toot. I think we're still calling Mastodon posts toots, and saying, this is really interesting what you have to say here, and adding on to the conversation. So if you just chime in a little bit, that can go a long way in being able to create some of those networking connections that you want. Some of us tend to be more visitors on social sites, and some of us tend to be people that want to join the conversation. It really just depends on the moment. But thinking about where you can add value to a conversation is a way to start with this. And also, if you're feeling like, okay, I don't really want to have a conversation, I just really want to be posting about posting my research or posting articles that I'm interested in, then resharing is also a really easy way to do that. You can just send those out, reshare, retweet, and then from there, you can go forward with showing what inspires you. And you don't have to think about this as being like you need to be resharing every article that you find interesting. Maybe you're someone that likes to spend a lot of time on social, but maybe you don't, and you're just trying to get started. So think about a few themes or happenings that you want to make your kind of thing, and be your I can't talk. I'm sorry, y'all. Be their cheerleader. So maybe your thing is I used the example of AI a little earlier. So maybe your theme is generative AI. You find that really interesting. You've been writing a lot about that. Maybe your theme is user experience. And maybe those two things you want to write about, and you're thinking about them and you're talking about them with your colleagues. Be really narrow and specific on what you want to share, and then just think about those themes and how you can keep resharing and talking about them. So when you see another article on AI that you find really interesting, repost it and say, have your comments on it. Maybe you agreed with the article, maybe you didn't. Kind of starting to think about a really narrow theme is a great way to get started if you're not really sure how you can go about that. That's a simple way to get the message out there and to really begin to create a following around the themes that you find interesting. So that's your first step. So those especially might apply to you if you're someone that's just getting started on thinking about how you can create a professional digital presence. So now that you've gotten started, you have some posts you've been sharing, here are some more tips on how you can actually use Twitter and Mastodon to do those things. Post as often as you like, and don't worry if you're not consistent. So typically when we think about like the way algorithms work, if you're posting once or twice a day, then that's going to mean your post will be consistently shared out. There are a lot of other kind of articles online on this that you can read, and you might find some other advice on that. But basically what this means is like, don't feel like you have to be posting all day, every day to be seen. Think about it as share those meaningful connections. And if you're somebody that loves social and you love to share and you're always finding new things that you want to talk about with your followers, that's great. And definitely don't feel like there's any limit on that. But if you're somebody that is maybe a little bit more hesitant on social and you're like, I don't know if I really want to talk that much, that's totally fine. If you're not super consistent, you don't need to feel like you have to be posting all the time. It's more important to be active. So showing those that view your profiles that you're on at least once a week is good, because then if a publisher wants to see, okay, are they using their social media at all? They can see, oh, okay, they're posting regularly. Not necessarily matters if you're posting all day, every day or not. So just think about finding the platforms that are most valuable for you to be able to share what you want, and then being consistent about using them and updating them. Now, this next tip is particularly more valuable if you're thinking about a portfolio website, but you might want to think about it with Twitter and Mastodon as well, which is thinking about your visual identity. So if you go on a certain brand's social, you probably have seen that they've created a visual around what their brand is, and it might use certain color schemes or certain kinds of photos. Thinking about the images that they use, you might individually want to do that a little bit, because creating a visual identity will help you in just kind of showing who you are as a person. Now, this is maybe more important if you're in a field where visuals matter more. So maybe if you're in the arts or design, or to some extent, maybe something with content strategy, branding might be more important than if you're someone that's just wanting to share articles that you're posting. But even if you're just sharing articles, you can share a visual that you create in Canva that just has the title of the article. There's a lot of research that shows that visuals do impact what people end up clicking on online. And one thing that I also like to point to is my personal favorite color generator, which is called Coolers. Not sure if any of you have ever used this, but if you want to create some Canva graphics and then create a little bit of a color scheme that represents who you are, you can do that with Coolers really easily. This is also like one of those things that will end up being a time suck because it's just fun to look at different color schemes and like find what works. But if you're not a graphic designer and you want to find a color scheme, throw those colors into a Canva template and just modify it a little bit. That can also go far when creating a kind of identity around who you are. And then also remember, you don't always need to be performing in a professional way. So LinkedIn tends to be the place where I go when I'm kind of using my social to be professional. A little bit also my Mastodon account, but LinkedIn in particular is meant to kind of be a professional space. But if you're using Twitter or Mastodon, yeah, sure, you might share your article, but maybe you also have an awesome cat that you want to talk about and you want to show, or maybe you are really, really passionate about baking and you want to be using it to also show that. That's really awesome. And I tend to think that the best people that use their digital platforms to create a sense of who they are balancing both being professional about it, sharing their work consistently, but also adding other things in as well. So having a little bit of fun with it, because it really is honestly about having a little fun, even if it is about being professional and creating an identity around things. So those are some other things that you'll want to consider. And then here's your kind of like other kind of things that are going to add a little more nuance to what we're thinking about. Choose your platforms wisely and consider separating professional and personal. Twitter and Mastodon might be more of your personal spaces that you don't really want to use for your professional work. And that is also 100% acceptable. You might want to just create a private Twitter account that you talk with your friends about or use to find memes or something like that. And then maybe your LinkedIn is your professional space where you share your work. Maybe you have another academic platform that you share your work and you don't want to have a lot of cross-pollination. That I personally think is a really good strategy because I know for me, I don't really have the same audiences on all my platforms that need to be seeing all of my research or all of the things that I do. So if you kind of narrow in on where the most valuable ones for you to be are, and then use those for your very specific purposes and creating those narratives we talked about at the beginning, that's going to be valuable to you long term. And of course, on that professional network, if you do want to occasionally post about the recipe that you recently made, then that's awesome. And that can also add to it. But you also can think about really keeping those things kind of locked down in a way that you can then feel like you can use certain networks to be professional and other ones to be more personal. Also, the other thing I wanted to add is just remember that you are responsible for what you post. So for example, if you're deciding that you want to share your work and you're posting a preprint of an article on social media, you probably want to double check with the journal that you are open to do so. There are a lot of rules on preprints that make it okay to do that. But you want to make sure you're careful on this because you don't want to get in trouble later if you resent something. It is important to know that you are responsible for what you post. And so if there is something that happens, you did know at least a little bit about what you were doing along those lines. So just remember that you are doing those things. And sometimes those lines can be a little bit tricky. Some organizations and institutions might have some guidelines around how they personally want to be thinking about their own identity. And brands often have really specific brand guidelines. But think about your own self as being able to be responsible for what you're saying and how you're contributing to a certain conversation. Now that we've talked a little bit about that, let's look specifically at digital presence on the Humanities Commons. So those are our general tips for how you can think about these things across all different platforms. But specifically on the Commons, we have 4 different functions. And if you're in this webinar, you probably are familiar with maybe 1 or 2 of these. But if you're not, here's a very quick overview of what they are. Profiles on the Commons are a quick and easy way to just assemble a digital presence. And we're going to look at an example profile after this to give you a better sense. But profiles are your space to basically say who you are, what you do, and what it looks like. Groups are a more collaborative space where you can contribute to discussions and get involved with your colleagues with having a conversation around certain topics. I'm going to talk about this more later, but you can use groups to develop your digital presence, and that's going to be related to specifically how you can get the word out about the work that you're doing. And we'll, as I said, we'll look at that in a couple minutes. Our core repository is our open access repository where you can share your work, and everything that's shared in core receives a DOI, and those contributions can be then shared out widely. Our core repository, and actually our site in whole, is really well indexed within search engines. And so using an open access repository allows you to get your word out, and you don't need to pay anything to get your work in core. All you have to do is create an account, and you have the ability to share your work out. So it's all there and available to anybody that is on the web and wants to find your research, whether it is a syllabus, a teaching material, an article, whatever it is, it can go into core. And then our sites, which are our WordPress-based websites, which in the topic of this webinar, the best option here would be to create a portfolio site. So if you have now thought about what I've said about portfolio sites and you're thinking, I really want to create that as my hub for everything that I do, we have WordPress-based websites that you can create on the Commons that you can use as that portfolio site. And overall, the way that they're set up, you can create one fairly quickly, so it's not going to take a lot of time. Now, I'm not going to name check any other academic profile websites in this webinar, but what I will say is that one of the benefits of our platform over some of those other ones is the way that you can create that connected identity. So there are a lot of other academic profile sites that will let you share your research, and maybe you can add a short bio and talk a little bit about who you are. But what our site does is it allows you to create an identity that is not just limited to research that you publish or downloads or stuff like that, that is going to be very much limited. Our site allows you to really branch out, and by creating a professional website and adding your work to our repository and effectively joining groups that will show some of your interests, you can really take control of what your identity looks like, and you're not going to be limited just by publications or just by one specific factor. Profiles are the way that you can do that really quick and easy. And so, as I said, I'm going to show you an example now of this. So if you have created an account on hcommons.org, once you have logged in or you've registered, you'll be dropped on our homepage. And then from there, you'll see your name will end up in the top right corner. And when you click on that, it will take you to your profile. And so I'm using my profile as an example because I'm me and I'm here. But what you can do now is customize this as much or as little as you want to. So just after you've registered, it will start to populate these fields here. So you can see it already has my name, my title, and my university that I work for. But then you can also add your social links here in this top area as well. So your ORCID ID can be added here, which is a great way then to link to your ORCID profile, where you might have more of your research and some of that other space that you've already started to create as a professional identity. You can also link to your Mastodon, to your LinkedIn. Those are the two that I have because those are the ones that I use as my most professional options. But you can also have your Facebook or your Twitter or other social links. If you have a portfolio site on another platform that's not the Commons, you can link to that here as well. So therefore, you can start to create those connections that if someone views your Commons profile, they'll know where else they can find you. You can add things like your profile picture, a cover photo, and then you can start to populate the rest of your profile. And because this is a screenshot, you can't see everything here, but I'm going to point you to what else you can do to enhance that profile. So there are some sections on your Commons profile that will automatically update, and that will happen as you start to use the Commons more. So if you don't have a lot of time to build a portfolio website, all you have to do is start using the Commons, and some of these things will start to be generated on their own. Commons groups that you follow and that you belong to will show up on your profile. Activity that you do. So if you comment in a public group or you create a blog post on a website, it will update on its own. Sites that you create, blog posts that you write, which this is, I personally think, one of the best parts is that if you go to someone's Commons profile, you can see what they've been writing about. So if you're not into social networking, but you have a blog and the Commons and you want to share that out, you can automatically have that populate. And then also work shared in core. So those things that you share in the core repository, like a syllabus or an article or a video or a journal or whatever it is, that will automatically show up on your profile. So you can direct people maybe in your organization, or if maybe you're applying for a job and you just want this to be your professional space, you can direct them there and they'll see it all. Now, the other sections that you have total control in updating are those social media handles, as I mentioned, academic interests that you can follow. So you can really create a wide-ranging view of how you're transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary, showing who you are and what you're interested in. You can add a bio, which can be as detailed or as short as you like, whatever you feel like fits with what you want to say. Your educational background, you can upload your CV directly. Other publications. So maybe you have some things that you don't have in core, but you want to add some other publications. Projects, which is also really awesome because maybe there's some stuff that you work on that does not directly have a publication attached to it, but you want to talk about it. You want to show what that is. You can add a link to that project and write a description of it. Or if you don't even have a link because it's something maybe you're working on within a task force at your university, but you're not quite at a point of having a presence for that, you can just write a little bit about it to let users know what you like to do. So it's really awesome because you can tailor it really specifically to what you want to do. If you're going to any upcoming conferences and you want people to know that, you can have that on your profile. And then lastly, if you're part of any professional orgs, you have those abilities either. So hopefully this is giving you a pretty clear sense of, yeah, there are things that will update automatically on your profile, but you also have total control to really shape where you want your users to go and where you want those that are on the Commons or those that you share your profile with to have access to. So just by dropping in that URL into a resume or a CV as a space, they can get a little bit more of a sense of who you are. And then, so this is what the bottom part of the profile looks like where I've customized. So you can see here are what my personal academic interests look like. The groups that I follow are here. And then how I've started to kind of shape these other sections I also have listed. So this is totally up to you and how much you want to build it out. The great thing about a profile is it's pretty quick to do. So as I mentioned earlier, if you don't have time to create a full website, just creating a profile is going to take you pretty far. And then you can share that link and use that as your starting point. And then once you get to a point where maybe, you have decided I do have more research that I want to create a website on, you could always build it on the Commons and have that blog go directly to your profile. So a lot of interconnectivity there. Now, I could very easily get into more details about all of the areas of our site and how they can help enhance your profile. But for the sake of time, we also asked our users on Twitter and Mastodon, what area of the Commons do you want to know more about in terms of how it can help you craft your identity online? So our winner overall actually ended up being groups across both platforms, although we also had a lot of interest in our core repository. I've touched a bit on that before. And also, if you're new to the Commons and you're not really sure what all of these things are, on our YouTube channel, we held another workshop a few months ago on Introduction to Humanities Commons. And that has a good overview of everything that we do on our site. So if you're not really sure what these things are, check out our YouTube channel and you'll see the link to that video. But now, as our winner ended up being groups on our topic of what do you want to know, here's some ideas that you can use to have groups be a part of your digital identity. And if you have experience with this on the Commons, feel free to write in the chat for other users in this webinar to know a bit about how you've used groups in order to enhance and get the word out about your digital projects. So first of all, as we saw, groups that you join will automatically be reflected on your profile. So if you join a public group on something like publishing in the publicly engaged humanities, other users that view your profile will be able to see that you've joined that group. And they can then also join that group as well if it's a public group. So it's a nice way that you can make that connection and show what you're interested in. Now you can also, if you've created a group, you can create a private group on your project and then create a public group site. And the same goes with public groups. So let's say you're using the private functions of groups in order to have a discussion board where you talk about a project, or maybe you're using docs to all as a group collaboratively write something. But that all is kind of private. You don't want a lot of people seeing it. Well, you can keep those features hidden on your group, but then create a public site where you could have a blog where you send regular updates on what you're doing in order to enhance your project. Or maybe you are just going to have a site that's going to be pretty static and just present information as is. All of these are things that you can do with the Commons group. They are really, they're really meant to be updated and modified as you want to keep it as public and private as possible. So you can really kind of work it into your workflow. And then any work sent to our open access repository can be shared within a group. So if you've published an article on, let's say, AI, and there's a group on AI on the Commons, you can then take that information, take that core deposit it to that group, and other users will be able to see it. So you can start to kind of create some interest around it just by adding your work into that group. So all can help in kind of shaping your identity and getting things across. Lastly, you could also participate in discussion boards in public groups. It might be a way to kind of start talking about some of the things that you're interested in, or getting a CFP out on something that you're engaged with, starting to kind of create that full profile. And everything on the Commons, as I mentioned before, is really well indexed on search engines. So if somebody searches for your profile or searches your name in Google, there's a great chance your Commons profile will end up near the top. So that way it will be able to be seen. So to wrap things up, I've done a lot of talking, but hopefully in this webinar now that we've kind of come to the end of things, you've thought now a little bit about who your audience is. On Humanities Commons, a lot of that audience is probably other scholars. Perhaps they're associated with institutions, perhaps they're not. Perhaps they're associated with a professional org, or maybe they're an independent scholar. But knowing that audience and who they are is going to be really helpful to you to know where you can get involved in a conversation. You've now had a chance to think a little bit about context and what those narratives are, what those things look like for you. And now hopefully, as part of this and what I've been saying, you're thinking a little bit about some of the spaces and tools that can help you get to the next step. In addition, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, this is also about having fun and being you. So the people that do their digital presence most effectively, whether they are a scholar or an influencer or somebody that is just creating a profile online that has very few followers, they're being themselves in that they're able to talk about their work, but they're also to share who they are. And so if you really want to be able to create an effective presence, have fun with it. And also remember that being you is going to be what's going to get you the farthest in terms of shaping what it looks like for you to be who you are online. So with that wraps things up for my portion of the presentation. So before we get into a couple questions from the Q&A, I wanted to also direct you to some resources. So first of all, I am really, really excited to announce we just this week launched our first Commons newsletter. And this is our email newsletter that we'll be sending on a monthly basis that will have more information about workshops like this one, more about, I'm going to drop the link to this while I need to I can't talk and type at the same time. So, oops, I just sent the wrong link. That's our survey link. Give me 1 second. See, this is what happens when I do a webinar and I'm trying to talk and type is I send the wrong link. Fill out our survey on this webinar, but in the meantime, here is our link to our newsletter. So this newsletter is going to have updates on what's going on at the Commons. Why is my chat box not showing up? Sorry, everybody. I'm experiencing some technical difficulties. Oh, there we go. Okay. See, I'm trying to stay professional in this webinar, and I am failing at it. All right, so there is our newsletter link. This newsletter is going to have regular updates on what's going on at the Commons, a little bit more about the work we do. We're going to be sharing out information on future workshops and other core deposit spotlights and things that are going on. So if you're not already signed up, sign up for it if you want to hear more from us. Our Commons Help and Support site is our support website. And so if you're looking for more information on the specific features of the Commons, I highly recommend going there. I'm going to drop in a link to that as well, so you can check it out. So if you want to know more about how your project or your profile works, this is the place to go. Our specific help email is hello@hcommons.org, and you can email us with any question that you have, or if you just want to ask some questions about how you can enhance your digital portfolio. And then our Twitter and Mastodon are our most active social networks. As you noticed throughout this webinar, will continue to be referring to it as Twitter and not a certain other name that has been addressed, but you can find us on that platform as well. And then last but not least, we just this morning published our newest blog post in our showcase series. And the showcase series has been really all about showing different ways that you can use the Commons. And this newest one is on digital presence and has some additional resources that I didn't have a chance to cover as part of this workshop. So you can see some core deposits that have some other really awesome tips related to academic social networking. Oops. So that is the place to go if you want to learn a little more. Now, I admit, we were going to have some time for questions, but we're running pretty short on time. So what I think I'm going to do is we're going to come back to the questions after, and I'm going to pass the mic to my colleague, Zoe Wake-Hyde. She is our community developer, and she's going to talk a little bit more about exciting things going on in the Commons. After she talks, I will hang out a little bit longer if there's some questions we didn't get to, but I want to make sure Zoe has a couple minutes to talk. So go ahead, Zoe, and I will let you take it away.
Thanks, Larissa. I'll do this very quickly so we can get to questions. So I wanted to share some of the things that are in the works at the Commons. We're always working on different projects to improve the site. So one that I think will be of interest is that we are soon kicking off a bit of a redesign process. And so you've seen some of the screenshots that Larissa's shared today. That's all going to get a bit of a facelift, which we're really excited about. And with that, we'll also be thinking through the UX, so the user experience and how people use the site. And so there are going to be some very visible changes, not for a few months yet, because we've got to kind of get that design work done internally, but keep an eye out for that. And so in particular, profiles will get a bit of a zhuzh and be looking nice and shiny for you to be building out as part of your digital presence. I'll mention too that the repository is also undergoing a bit of an overhaul at the moment. We're looking at early next calendar year to be launching a beta of a new repository software. I could get nerdy about that, but the important things for you will be that there'll be a bunch of additional features, things like versioning, being able to upload multiple files, and better control over drafting and editing deposits. And from that, we're then going to be building out more kind of interactive and those conversational elements, discussion elements on deposits, so that the conversation about work that's being done can be happening in multiple spaces across the Commons, which again, as Larissa gestured to, we keep in this very connected way so that people can find works that are relevant to them and be, connecting with people who have similar interests, and that is kind of happening all across these different spaces. And I'll mention too, I think Bonnie briefly gestured to this in the chat, we have our Mastodon server, hcommons.social, which we invite you to join if you're looking for a place to get started with Mastodon. And we're learning a lot from that. And there are a few, again, kind of technical things from that we're looking to bring into the Commons. So there will be more kind of the social features that Mastodon does so well coming into the Commons site over, again, this is a bit of a longer term project, but we're really excited to see that, see the success of Mastodon at the moment and learn from it and make our interactive spaces more exciting and engaging. So I'll stop there. Thank you all. Back to you, Larissa.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Zoe. And as I said, now I don't see any questions in our Q&A, but we'll hang out a couple extra minutes if people have questions. Thank you so much for being here today, and I really appreciate you all spending the time to hang out with us. Looking forward to seeing what exciting things you all do with your digital presence on the Commons, and have an awesome rest of your day. So thanks.